Hello and welcome to Romantasy Readers Podcast. My name is Nicole, and as always, I am joined by my fabulous co-host, Ali. As usual, we are coming back to you with our most successful podcast episodes that we have delivered. We have had people begging us for more. So
Literally begging.
yeah, and in true romantasy style, there was no way I wasn't going to get on this because this is my canon. This is my Roman Empire. I'm always going to talk about this whenever I've got an opportunity. We are talking about Bryceriel.
Bryceriel! I feel like we need little cannons that are like bow, bow, bow.
I know. We need to add some sound effects in there to make it exciting. But
yeah,
you guys know I try to not get into particular ships and that, but God have I fallen for Bryceriel, and both of us have.
yeah.
And I can't not share this information, especially when people are asking for it. In the last few months, Bryceriel has really been exploding. We've got some amazing people on TikTok that are now sharing a lot of information about this. You've got the Knife and the Sword, you've got Azriel, Club Rat, a few amazing TikTokers that are sharing a lot of this evidence, and hence a lot of people are getting behind this. There's now a Reddit group that's all around Bryceriel. So if you are interested, there are definitely multiple places that you can find out more information, but we're going to share some of it with you today. For anyone that has not seen our previous episodes, please go back and review them. We've gone into in the past about just the origins of Bryceriel, some of the initial evidence. We've also had some subject matter experts with Peach coming along. So there's plenty there. But Ali, do you want to tell us a bit about what are you excited about us talking about today?
Yeah, I feel like today we're bringing some new things that we haven't talked about yet that are a bit more like the next layer down of the evidence. I feel like in the past, a lot of the stuff we've talked about has been more just like the high level sort of parallels between the Orion story and the Stone Mother theory and more of the kind of like symbolism, whereas now we're talking beyond just symbolism and actually like very specific things that we're seeing SJM do. And to be honest, as I was trying to prep a little bit for this episode, it becomes overwhelming because it's like you can either talk about the high level symbolism or you can get incredibly detailed. Yeah. And I would, if you guys are interested in this theory, I really would encourage you to go to our friend Peach's TikTok, the Knife and Sword. There's so much evidence and it's all like in formats that you can read. Even, and it like, we're tons of like analyzing even just like paragraphs between things. Like I was looking at one today where it's analyzing the way that Feyre and Rhys met and the way that Azriel and Bryce meet. And like they're structured almost exactly the same with the same like sentences and words and and like we can't really do that as well in a podcast form, because then we'd just be like reading things to you and that's not as interesting. But stuff like that it starts to become this like massive black hole that you can fall into.
Absolutely. And that is what happens to most people that fall into Bryceriel. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. And once the pieces click together,
Yes.
all of a sudden you see it and you can't unsee it. I do not know anyone that has become a Bryceriel and fallen back out of it again. Everyone I know, once they have seen this, they're a Bryceriel. They're just like, this is going to happen. There is just too much compelling evidence and too many similarities between the way Sarah has written Bryce and Azriel and all their interactions in comparison to Feyre and Rhys, in comparison to Aelin and Rowan. And that's really detailed out really, really nicely on some of the TikToks that the Knife and the Sword has shared, that Peach has shared, and Azriel Club Rat. So get onto them because they will probably give you a more clear outline of this compared to what we'll do today. But what we will do it's just
I do want to yeah. Welcome to the chaos. We're bringing the chaos. Okay, we might convince you, we might not, but it'll be a good time.
Exactly.
And I do just want to say the one thing that is somewhat different between Nicole and I is that I don't know that we're that different, but I am convinced, and I think what we're telling you today is that Bryce and Hunt, not Bryce and Hunt, Bryce and Azriel are mates. I still think there could be a world where SJM reveals that they are mates and has Bryce choose to reject the bond. So we're not necessarily even arguing that that Bryce and Azriel are endgame, though I think many of the Brycerials really hope for that. But what we're arguing is that there is enough evidence to suggest that they have a mating bond similar to the mating bond that we have seen in Throne of Glass and ACOTAR. Who knows what SGM is going to explore with that, right? Like she may choose to explore the idea of someone rejecting the bond. So like it doesn't necessarily mean that like we're not going to get
It's
to see
endgame.
that it's endgame, right? We're not necessarily arguing they're endgame. We're arguing that they're mates. And I think that's a big difference. And if you come at it with that perspective, especially if you're not a Bryce and Azriel fan, if you ship Bryce or Azriel and Elaine or Azriel and Gwen, like you can still enjoy the evidence that they're mates and then still have your heart set on Azriel ending up with someone else.
Look, we are not on this podcast. We are not about panning anyone else's ship. Like if you're allowed to love what you love, if you love your ship, 100% support that. We're not going to be here and say that they are bad, that they're not going to happen. We don't know what Sarah J. Maas has planned. At the end of the day, this is all in her brain. Who knows what she's going to give us? But she's certainly outlaid enough evidence to suggest that there's a pretty strong connection between Azriel and Bryce that I think will at some point get explored. Whether that does mean that they are officially fated mates in Endgame, who knows? Who knows where she's going to take it? But I think it will be a really, really fun time either way. So we'll just have to wait and see. My theory is that Hunt is going to end up being a villain. And I think that the only way we're going to see Bryce truly grow is through her having a relationship with Azriel. Because right now, look, I'm going to start with something I was going to talk about at the end. I'm going to talk about now. Most people say, I don't want Bryce and Azriel to be together because I don't like Bryce. They say, I don't like Bryce. She's immature. She doesn't want to accept who she really is. And I get that. I think the thing that you've got to understand is I think that's because she is with the wrong person. She is not with someone that's encouraging her to grow. She is with someone that's encouraging her to be the same. Very similar to a kind of relationship that Aelin had with Kale, where he wanted her to just be Selena. He didn't want her to change. And when she started to grow and change, that relationship fell apart and he wasn't who she needed. I think that's similar for Bryce and Hunt, that I think he is not encouraging her to grow. He just wants her to stay the same. He just wants her to be a little secretary at the museum. He wants to just be married, have 10 kids. Like he's not about her growing and accepting who she really is. And that I think is what we're potentially going to see in the next book. But Ali, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, and I think if you think about it from the perspective of like a story arc, it's very we're following potentially a very similar story arc structure to Aelin herself.
Yep.
You start with the Act 1, which is not necessarily in a book. Act 1 can be multiple books, and in Throne of Glass, it is multiple books. So, Act 1 is they sort of uncover or discover that they have some kind of it's the inciting event, right? Is what you would call it in story structure. But the inciting event is they uncover their destiny, right? And then Act 2 is when they're like, nope, want nothing to do with that destiny. I don't want it. I'm just gonna be who I am, and that's it.
I'm avoiding it.
I'm avoiding it, right? And then Act 3 is where somebody, a mentor or a lover, comes along and helps them acknowledge and accept the fate that awaits them, right? This is a very common structure in fantasy. And this is what happens with Aelin, right? So if you think about Aelin and Bryce as being very, very similar, right? They are very similar. We're kind of around like the era Firemark,
Yeah.
We're in this like moment where Bryce doesn't want to accept her fate, and something or someone is going to have to come along to push her to accept it. And in SJM, typically, and because this is romantasy, that will often be a lover.
Yes.
And it's not going to be Hunt, right? Because it's not somebody that's in your life currently.
We're 3 books in, and Hunt is not supporting growth at all. As a matter of fact, half the time when she shows growth, he just gets frustrated at her and angry at her and things like that. He's just like, oh, I just don't understand her. So we almost get a lot of shutdown with him a lot of the time when she kind of explores growth. Whereas just in part 1 of HOFAS, we saw so much potential. We just saw a completely different Bryce. Like, no one can deny. She stopped being like, oh, don't do that, alpha hole. Did she say alpha hole to Azriel once? Not
Nope.
once. Nope. Nope, that suddenly disappeared for her. When it's Azriel, when it's, when it's Hunt, she calls him an alpha hole, but when it's Azriel, it's like, oh no, this is fine. Oh, we're holding hands and you're walking me through the prison, also fine. This is not our typical Bryce. She's acting very, very differently, which is very interesting. But I think going back to what you were saying, Ali, I think there are the 3 acts, and the part 1 of the first act is where they're in complete denial. They find out their destiny. They're like, I don't want it. I just want to be a normal girl. I'm avoiding it. They're in avoidance phase. Then act 2 is where they get this mentor come along and they finally have to start growing and accepting who they are and becoming who they need to be for that destiny. And then act 3 is them finally having the strength and the magic and the power and the support behind them to then defeat the big bad, to defeat the baddie and overcome and win it all. So when we compare that to where we're at now with the Crescent Cities, we're really still just in act 1, because like Bryce said herself, she's like, oh yeah, I've ticked those boxes. I've like, yep, tick, done. And it's like, no, love, you're not done whatsoever. You have not, that prophecy that's there that says, when knife and sword are reunited, so shall our people be. It's like, no, you haven't really done that. Mingling. I think she's like, oh yeah, we've mingled, like close enough.
And Sarah J. Maas doubles down on that at the end of HOFAS, right? She could easily have just had some just kind of not acknowledged or addressed the Bryce being a princess thing, but she doesn't. She explicitly shows Bryce dismantling the Fae, renouncing her title, having this symbolic moment of, nope, I don't want my destiny. There's no reason to do that unless it's because it's going to come back on her. That's not the happy ending for Bryce. Renouncing her title and her destiny is not her happy ending.
Yep. She's like,
that is her, like,
yep. Her just being like, oh yeah, we're just going to have a democracy here. She's handed over the Star Sword to Akatar and thinking nothing's wrong. But guess what? Pegasuses have just like exploded from the mountain. And we don't even know what's happened on Akatar land. So definitely a high chance that, guess what, Bryce, like destiny's coming for you. You haven't solved it. It's only just beginning and it's going to catch up with you. You're not getting away with it that easy. So we definitely have more coming. But I think something I really want to go into is talking about some of the similarities between Bryce and Aelin, because for most Brycerials, one of the things that's really, really compelling is just the similar type of character that Bryce is to Aelin. So I just wanted to outline some of the similarities of their 2 characters and why I think that Sarah J. Maas is going to take them in a similar journey. Firstly, they both have big secrets, and as they go along, they are revealed. They both are running from their destiny. They have destiny, they have titles, they are avoiding them. While they've obviously been different stories, and we've found out Selena and Aelin's as we've gone along, and Bryce's has been a little different as we've gone along, and particularly by the 3rd book, that's when we've started to find out the destiny. And that's really what's happened in HOFAS. We found out, we really got an info dump, but we found out all this stuff about who she really is, her connections to Thea, that she's meant to be the ruler of Dusk Court. And right now she's just running away from it and saying, I don't want a bar of this. Hides plans constantly. Both Aelin and Bryce plan and then don't even talk about it to anyone, including the reader. It's extremely frustrating, but they both have done that. They're both potentially connected to goddesses. Obviously, Aelin was connected to Marla, and we've got Bryce who's connected to Thea and has these connections to the Dusk Court, and potentially is actually the rightful ruler of the entire of, Prithian. So definitely got some interesting things to explore there. And I think there's going to be some what is going to happen between Rhysand and Nesta. I just want to see Bryce go back there, because even removing the Azriel aspect, just her right as heir is so interesting. And I would love that explored just on its own. They both have a traumatic death of a best friend that changes them. They've both had that happen and how it's influenced them. Both very good at killing people. They're both Aelin was an assassin. Bryce is just super, super intelligent, and she's a real game player. It's one of the favorite things that we have is that Azriel and Bryce both love playing games. We know with Azriel, his favorite thing to do is snowball fight. He plans months in advance. They always say trying to get around Azriel is the hardest thing. He's the best game player compared to Cassian, who just kind of rocks up and, you know, he's just like, he just uses brawn to sort it out. Whereas Azriel game plans, he's never met his match. No one's, and really, without going too much into it, Elaine, Gwyn, don't really think they're the game players. Whereas with Bryce, and we saw it in HOFAS, the way they played around with each other, like she was outthinking him, then he was outthinking her.
Yeah.
They were having the best time, and neither of them, even Hunt has struggled to match Bryce. He's often said no one can figure out what Bryce has got planned. So I think that that's really interesting that that for them, like Bryce and Azriel, they are equal sitting in that place. And that to me is something that both those characters would be hugely important to them in a relationship and would be hugely important to them in their own growth and connection and journey. Both of them are queens of their people. Biggest thing. Aelin was queen. She knew that. She was avoiding that destiny. Bryce is doing exactly the same thing. She is meant to be the ruler of Duskcourt. She's potentially even meant to be the ruler of Prithian, but she is walking away right now from Bryce. She's even walking away from ruling
well, and yeah, like she is technically now a queen at the end of HOFAS because the Autumn King is dead.
Even in Midgard.
Like in Midgard, she is the queen of the Fae.
Yeah.
Like she is a queen. They've also both traveled across realms, you know?
Yes.
In different ways, but they've both traveled across realms. There are so many connections.
They are both like have Fae connections and they both hate it. Like they both, you know, Aelin hates her Fae side and she is avoiding it so much through the first 3 books, really. It's only in the 3rd book that once she is introduced to Rowan that she starts to explore it. Bryce is exactly the same. Hates that she's Fae, hates that half of her, and is only starts to hate the Fae a little less when she's in ACOTAR, and also being introduced to characters like Nesta and going, oh, there are people here that have been changed from human to Fae, and what does that mean? Are they similar to me? There's a huge amount of growth potential there with a friendship between Nesta and Bryce, which is something I'm also desperate to see. I think that right now Bryce is missing a best friend. Like ever since Danica's died, she doesn't have that real connection. She's got her other friends. She's got Hunt, but she lacks that real sisterly connection. And I think in all of Sarah J. Maas's books, she's generally wanted that real friendship connection, has always paid attention to how important that is. And I feel like Nesta and Bryce could potentially have that connection again.
Yes.
I would also love to see that.
Yeah. Bryce absolutely needs that. Like Aelin has Lysandra, Feyre has Mor, Nesta has Gwyn, and I cannot think of the other name right now. I do my research for one book. Everything
in a while.
Yeah, whatever. You know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Bryce doesn't have that. And that is, to me, like that in and of itself, to me, is like evidence that Bryce's story isn't over.
Yes.
Like she doesn't have her female best friend. Like that is critical to an SJM heroine. Is there like female best friend that calls them out on their shit, and Bryce doesn't have that anymore.
Exactly.
Juniper is not doing that. Fury is not doing that.
No. And not only that, but our theory is that we've got to end up with Sailor Moon connections in the future books, that Bryce is part of this bigger world that's going to be Sailor Moon. For anyone that doesn't know, Sarah J. Maas was a huge Sailor Moon fan. She wrote fan fiction when she was younger, and we really believe that Bryce is basically Sailor Moon. She's got the star on her chest, her power is starlight. That is Sailor Moon. There's a lot of connections. This is also where Azriel comes in, because the love interest of Sailor Moon is Tuxedo Mask, and he throws roses. What is something we know that is quite pivotal, well, sort of pivotal to Azriel's relation, like kind of, I don't know, who is his character? He lives in Rose Hall. There are a few connections to roses. The necklace he gives to, well, it ends up kind of going to Gwyn. It's a rose. So Sarah J. Maas has just thrown in those little roses here and there, which is very connected to Tuxedo Mask. So it'll be very interesting to see if we get that. But the big thing about Sailor Moon is not only is there the love connection, there's also the friendship connection. We have about 5 girls all in a group that are defeating the world. And I think Sarah loves the idea of girl power. I think she will love the idea of potentially building these Valkyrie and this group of girls that are going to defeat the evil and battle it out. And I think that we're going to see Bryce potentially being the leader. And then we're going to see characters like Nesta and possibly Gwyn, possibly the other one that I can't recall right now. I feel like it starts with E.
Maybe Sarah, maybe Elaine, maybe, Aelin, who
And
knows?
it could be characters from I think we really think it could be also characters from Midgard that could be coming in as
Yeah,
well. So Lydia and characters like that. So I think
yeah,
that that's another potential really exciting aspect for future books. And that's
yeah.
one of the reasons I think we love Bryceriel too, is because of the potential of this
To
massive
expand the
story
world.
this could turn into.
Yeah, yeah. And I do wanna go back. I wanna make sure we close the loop on why does it matter that there are so many connections between Bryce and Aelin? It's because, right, like, Aelin did not meet her person for several books. One of the arguments we often hear is, "Yeah, but they've been together for 3 books now." Like, Sarah J. Maas would not let it linger that long, and I'm like, "Okay, but have you read Throne of Glass?" Like, it takes a long time to find the true person, for Aelin, and if Bryce is similar, then why would we think that why would she be able to find her person so quickly?
Mhm,
I really do think that the Crescent City series piv was a pivotal series for SJM to be able to create her Massverse,
mhm,
and the person that she chose to put at the center of that was going to be very important because it allows her to expand, which is both creatively satisfying and commercially satisfying. So the idea that Bryce is now just living her happily ever after, it just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, there's no way that SJM would just let this like incredibly important character who is connected to a goddess who's able to travel, who's the queen of the Fae in multiple realms, just go off and live happily ever after with Hunt. Like that just
yeah,
isn't
no.
we're just the story's not done.
Yeah, yeah. And look, let's be honest here, and we need to go in because a huge part of dispelling, I guess, the current belief that Bryce and Hunt are endgame is because we don't like Hunt. And we ultimately, well, I mainly ultimately think that Hunt is a villain, or I at least think he is not right for Aelin, for
Bryce.
Bryce. And I think that long term, we're going to see a very similar like prospect for him as what happened to Kale. So what someone said very recently, which was very accurate, they said, I want to prove that Hunt is basically Kale, but with feathers. And this is the reason why. So the main reason that we compare Kale and Hunt is that Kale doesn't want Aelin to change. He wants her to be Selena. He falls in love with Selena, and once she starts to grow and change into Aelin, he doesn't like that. He hates her face side. He doesn't want her to change. Hunt is quite similar. He wants Bryce. He wants just Bryce. He doesn't want her to grow. He doesn't really want her to change. And as we've seen her start to grow and develop, he's and I think this is still going to happen more in the next book, but I think we're going to see him be quite resistant to those changes, to her potentially stepping up and being a ruler. The more that she started to take charge, the more that Hunt was actually getting quite angry at her, and they were starting to have a lot of disagreements and arguments at the end of HOFAS. I think what's going to happen with Hunt is he may not necessarily be a full-blown villain. Not that I could see that happening with the Princes of Hell and them actually being the ultimate villains and him being called out as a weapon that's been made for Bryce. I think there's a chance that he could go full villain mode. But I also think, similar to Kale, he may make some bad choices that will lead to him not being the right mate for her. We've already sort of seen there be a few instances where Hunt struggles to manage his anger. When he gets angry, he almost becomes a different entity, a different person. And Bryce has struggled to get him under control. The first time was when he went full alpha mode when she was in danger, but he went next level to the point that she has to have sex with him to actually calm him down. Like the first time they are intimate is because he's gone off tap. He's just gone nuts and he's a danger to everyone, almost including Bryce, and she has to lead him away and settle him down with sex, which is kind of a red flag just on its own. Then we have the whole lightning incident at the end of HOFAS, where he at the last minute pulls his lightning back and then he says, "Oh, I would never hurt Bryce," which instantly again puts that alarm bells in my head to say, "Oh, never say never, buddy." Like, as soon as you say that, I feel like you got really close to
Yeah.
crossing that line. And I think, again, I guess another parallel I see is Bryce having a similar experience to her mum, that she is going to have basically an abuse incident occur with Hunt where he is going to hurt her, and that is going to lead to her going, "This is a bad relationship and I'm out," similar to her mum, Ember. Because I think right now Bryce is like, "Oh, how could my mum have ever made that decision? Like, how
Yeah.
did she end up with the Autumn King? That was such a bad relationship." And then her following relationship was the really, really good one. And I think that is another aspect that Bryce potentially needs to explore and will explore. I think we can see the telltale signs that Hunt could be abusive. He's generally not. But when he gets angry, he has a hard time controlling himself.
Yeah.
And going back to Hunt and Kale, both of them really talk about hating the FMC. Kale, by book 4, when Aelin has started to go on her growth journey and she has been with Rowan, like she's been up in the north with Rowan, learning and growing, he hates her. He actually goes through a period of hating her. And it's like, hang on, if you love someone, you shouldn't be able to hate them. Like, a mate never hates their mate.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is something that's really interesting with Hunt, because yet again, at those last scenes of Hofas, he actually sort of says, "Right now, I hate Bryce." And it's like, whoa, we've never had a mate say that they hate their mate. Rhysand has never said that about Feyre. You know, Rowan never
Yeah.
said that about Aelin. They just can't. Even if they're frustrated, they still love them to death. They love them. They never feel like that. But yeah, so there's some of the similarities. What are your thoughts, Sally?
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think, especially if we're just seeing the fact that it's just a parallel that he's not the end game for Bryce, right? Because Kale wasn't either. And I think that makes a lot of sense and I see those connections for sure. Um and I think that like there are even if I think that like you can also take that argument out entirely and still think that Bryce and Azriel are mates. Like, I do still think you can think that Bryce and Hunt are really good together and still see the Bryce Azriel connections.
Yeah.
And so I think what like that's to me like I'm more interested in like the connections between Bryce and Azriel because I but to your point, like, the only reason I went looking for a different mate for Bryce was because I didn't like Hunt. Like, I we're very
Yeah.
honest on this podcast that, like, neither of us have ever really liked Hunt that much. It's
No.
kind of always felt like it didn't click, it didn't have that romance. It literally it bothers me so much, like, the way that they have their first spicy time, the way that they tell each other they love each other, the way that they say that they're mates in gym clothes. Like, it just
It's not romantic. It's
that's
never
not the
romantic.
romance
Even
I
when they
want.
become mates, it's like, "Oh, well, what if we call it a mate? Oh, yeah, that sounds cool, babe. Let's do that."
Yeah,
Like, comparing it to Aelin and Rowan and
or,
Feyre and Rhysand when they realize they're
like,
mates, like, the
chapter
intensity of
55
those
and chapter
scenes.
56, right? The
Yes.
classic ACOTAR chapters, like, that's not a chapter 55, chapter 56 moment. It's just not.
And look, and I think this is something I really love that Sarah J. Maas explores, is it's not that you can't have these relationships and they won't even necessarily not be successful relationships. You can have the difference between a good relationship and the best relationship for you.
Yeah,
That,
yeah,
yes, like Aelin could have been happy with Kale. She could have just stayed in her little life and just been happy with Kale and been more of a mortal and ignored her face side and her destiny. And she could have just lived a happy little life there without growth. Bryce is similar. She could just hand off all the powers and she could just say, "Nope, I'm just happy in this little relationship with Hunt. Let's just go to the gym and go get coffee and wear baseball caps backwards and order pizza." Like, we could just have this little relationship, avoiding your destiny, avoiding your fate, and not growing into who you need to be. Do I think she's going to grow with Hunt? I don't think she is going to. Now, everyone
well, and
can come back at me
again,
if they don't
like,
agree.
it comes down to like classic storytelling, right? Like you always have to have this external force that helps the person accept their fate. Like that
Yeah.
is Merlin for Arthur. Like it goes all the way back. Like I didn't prep any of this, so I have literally I
Off the top of
probably
your
could come
head.
up with examples, but I might be wrong. So I just think that if you believe that Bryce's story isn't over, then you have to believe that there is going to be some kind of catalyst to help her accept her destiny, and that catalyst is not part of her everyday existence right now. It's not part of her reality right now because that's just how the storytelling works. We think that catalyst is Azriel. Maybe that catalyst is something else, but it just doesn't make sense. Bryce isn't. There's no way that Bryce would possibly be that catalyst for her.
Yeah.
Speaking of though, like the connections between the mate stories, right? And saying how this doesn't feel like an SJM mate story. I want to talk a little bit about some of the parallels between Azriel and Bryce and the other mates that we know.
Yeah.
So, one of the things for me that's the most like
Compelling.
the most evidence compelling, thank you, is the word I was looking for, is that all of our other major mate pairs have some kind of bond other than the mating bond that helps to hide the mating bond. We see this with Rowan and Aelin. They think that they're Caranum, and that's why they have this connection. And so they're like, oh, well, yeah, we have this connection because we're Caranum. Feyre and Rhys have the bargain that they strike. So for a long time, we think, oh, they have this interesting connection. They can be in each other's minds. He can feel her emotions. He can tell that she's, been trapped because of the bargain, of course,
The yanking, the pull, the tug.
Yeah, the yanking, the
it's
pull.
all because of the bond.
Yeah. And Azriel and Bryce also have this thing that hides the true mating bond through the weapons, the knife and the sword. And we see that playing out, right? And for everyone who says, as Bryce is leaving Prithian, and Azriel is like, don't leave, and all the times they're being pulled to one another, everyone says, oh, that's just the weapons. And it's like, that sounds exactly like what we said about the Caradon bond and the bargain. Like there's clearly that thing there that's hiding the bond, just like every other mated pair.
Yeah.
And let's not forget, we've talked about this before, but to me, this is also massive. The only other couples who have walked into the prison holding hands are mates.
Yeah.
Nesta and Cassian, Feyre and Rhys both walk into the prison holding hands. Bryce and Azriel walk into the prison holding hands, despite neither of them being the kinds of people who ever want to hold hands
randomly with random intergalactic fae. Like
much less. Like Bryce doesn't even want to hold Hunt's hand, and Azriel does not want to allow Elaine to see his hands. And they just somehow, within like a day of knowing each other, hold hands going into the prison. This like super sacred, important thing.
It's almost subliminal for them. It's happening on another base level that almost Azriel can't stop himself from holding her hand. And why? Why? He knows Nesta. He's known Nesta for years. Like, if he should be holding anyone's hand in that moment, it should be Nesta's. He should be like, oh, I just want to protect you. I know you really well. This person's a complete stranger from another planet. Don't actually care if she dies. Like, really not a big deal for me. So, like, I should just be leaving her alone. But no, he doesn't do that. He's protecting her constantly. He holds her hand through the prison. When Nesta's got the mask on, he pulls her to him and uses his wings to shield her as he pulls her back from Nesta. Now, yet again, why is he needing to protect this intergalactic fae? Like, I know they're trying to figure out where she's going in that, but really, it's not that important. It's not that important that he would put his wings on the line. And we know how delicate wings are for fae, how much that's a very delicate thing to put between you and danger. So I think you've got to think about some of those things and what's happening for Azriel on a more subliminal level when he's around Bryce, because he's acting very out of character compared to how we've seen him with every other character. Another aspect that's really interesting on this topic that I had only been made privy to more recently is a line in House of Sky and Breath. Now, this is a line that for the OG Bryceriels, this was the line that they went, oh my gosh, it's Azriel and Bryce. I didn't pick it up until someone told me. And then I was like, how did I miss that? That is crazy. But Bryce is talking to Rune in House of Sky and Breath. And they're talking about, they've got the star sword there. And then she just randomly sort of says, just in conversation, I wonder if there's a dagger out there for me. I wonder if there is a dagger out there for me. Now, I completely missed this line, but now we know who has a dagger, who has a very important dagger that is connected to the Star Sword. It is Azriel. And another thing to really consider, when we go to the Sarah J. Maas website, I'm sure many of you have jumped on that website and you get the main, like she's got the couple of big, like just sentences that come up that are really, really important. The first one is Rhysand saying, there you are. Obviously one of our favorite lines in the whole of all of ACOTAR. We love it.
Yep.
The other one is about the sword and the dagger, that they're not just they're not just hugging, they're singing now. But she has specifically used that line. Now, if we look at HOFAS, it's like, why is that the line that was used in that moment if this isn't important to the bigger story? Because at the end of HOFAS, the dagger and the sword really meant nothing. Bryce handed it off to ACOTAR and went, I'm not dealing with that. I'm just going to live my little life here and avoid my destiny. And yet,
why wouldn't it be a line of, Bryce saying, I love you to Hunt, or Hunt saying, you're made for me, or something like that?
Exactly.
Why wouldn't it be something about the princes of hell, right? Like, why would it be that? Because other than having the sword take her to Prythian, the dagger and the sword don't really have a huge part to play in that story as it so far, right? It's a very like, why do that? The other thing is, it specifically is the line about them singing together, and Azriel is called the Shadow Singer. Like, I feel like these are very specific Easter eggs.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they're indicating things on multiple levels, multiple layers, which is what SJM likes to do.
Yeah.
The other, like, there are so many
parallels
between between Feyre and Rhys and Aelin and Rowan and Bryce and Azriel. Like, I could bring up so many. And every single one of them, there's a moment where one of them gets hurt, and they're like, and the language is described as like cradling the hands, or like cradling the back, or like, what hurt you? Same thing happens with Bryce and Azriel. There are like, it just goes on and on and on. There are so many tiny moments. And like, also, SJM did not have to give that many pages to Prythian. If Prythian wasn't important, she easily could have had the caves be a couple chapters. Because from a plot perspective, not that much happens in the caves other than the character development. And why spend time on the character development if it's not important to the larger story?
Let's be honest.
She easily could have had Bryce arrive, Bryce run away, Bryce leave. Like, and those could be the three chapters.
Not had them mixed with the other characters. Could have had her run away, solve the problems on her own, which would have been very Bryce.
Yep.
But she didn't do that. For some reason, she felt like it was inherently important to bring along Azriel and Nesta to that whole adventure. Why those
and to dedicate a third of the book to it?
Yeah.
I mean, that is in a 1,000-page book, right? Like
in fairness, guys, I could have had the whole book in ACOTAR, just FYI. Like, I didn't even need Midgard. Hated every chapter that was in Midgard. I could have just had all ACOTAR. That makes me happy.
Yeah. To me, that was like the only part of the book that was good.
Yes, I agree.
You're not getting into that today.
But on a slightly different tact, another thing that was explored with Aelin and Rowan was Rowan had a fake mate bond. And it's the only time that Sarah J. Maas has explored this in her books, was that Maeve actually created a fake mate for him. Hence, that also created a big like barrier in them realizing that they were mates, because he was convinced that he'd already had one. He was like, you only get one. It's like, I've had it, so you can't be my mate, even though I'm feeling this connection to you and it feels more than I've ever felt before. It can't be, because I've already had my mate and she died. So that tricked him. Now, when we look at Hunt, the Princes of Hell have very specifically said that they made Hunt for Bryce. They made him, which to me suggests that he's not an organic being. He's been created. Therefore, he is somewhat of a created mate, not an organic one. So I think that
Not one
really
set by
does.
destiny,
Yes,
right?
yes.
He's not a fated mate. He's not. He's literally not fated. The point of fated mates is that some power that we don't understand puts them together. But we understand the power that put Bryce and Hunt together.
Yep.
We're
Yep.
told exactly how it happened. And you know, if you think about the larger like Massverse, I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that Maeve originates from the world that the Princes of Hell are from, right? That
Yes, yes.
and so like clearly the
They have
knowledge
the
of
power.
how to
Oh my
do
God, I didn't
that.
think of that connection
Oh,
till
you
just
haven't thought of that
now.
yet? Oh god.
Like,
Yeah,
yes,
so
I
like
haven't read Throne of Glass in
yeah,
ages,
in
okay,
so
guys,
long.
forgive
Yeah.
me, but that's so true.
Yeah. So it's like the knowledge of
They
how to
know,
do
oh
this like fake
my God.
mate thing originates in this like same world. So like of course they know how to do it, you know?
Yes, because the power is from the Princes of Hell. It's from hell. Like, that's where they learn how to do it. It could be exactly the
Mhm.
same magic that they've used. I like forgot that aspect of Maeve, that was a huge part of her character, that she was
Yeah.
actually like a queen of the Princes of Hell.
Yeah.
That, yeah,
Now, and think about it this way, like a lot of people think
super
that
cocky.
Throne of Glass is in the past. That like Akatar and Midgard are existing in the same time, but Throne of Glass is in the past. I disagree with that. I think that it's all happening at the same time, which would suggest that Maeve potentially was in the realm that the Princes of Hell are from when they faked the bond with Hunt. Because they also say that they
Well,
experimented and tried multiple times before they made it successful in Hunt.
yeah. I,
Um,
I think the line we know where the timelines were accurate, when Aelin goes through the multiple universes and she sees Feyre and Reese, and Feyre is
is
pregnant.
pregnant.
So we know that at that moment when she's going through, and that's at the end of, Kingdom of Ash, that is around the time that Feyre is pregnant with Nyx. So that's
Mhm.
kind of our timeline. So this time after now, we know that Nyx is running around, Rhys in his super protective dad mode, and Bryce and Azriel and Nesta are going through the cave. So this is after that event. Like, so yes, you're right. Potentially, I mean, Hunt, how old is Hunt? He's a couple 100 years old, isn't he? Like, so,
I think
and
yeah, more
we,
than that. Yeah.
yeah,
Like
we know
3 or
Azriel
400.
is around 500 years old. I think Hunt is 200 to 300 years old. So we're looking at, if we look at the timeline, Hunt has potentially been created somewhat after that, has been put on Midgard. There are many connections to say that Hunt and Azriel look very, very similar. So there's kind of connections
And
there as
they have
well.
similar scents. They have similar scents. They have you know, the two different the wing, they both have wings. Like they're very similar. Um and it also says that the Princes of Hell sort of like had to experiment for a while to figure out how to do this. So, you know, I don't know exactly when, for example, Maeve, we don't exactly know when Maeve comes to the Throne of Glass world from her realm, though we know she comes from some kind of realm that the Vogue are from. But I think there is the potential, right, that she was around as the Princes of Hell were experimenting with mate bonds. Or vice versa, they saw what she did and like took it back, and because they clearly like still had a connection into the Throne of Glass world until Aelin sealed it. So I just think that again, like that's just another tiny
Yeah,
little
yeah.
hint to
And
us
look,
that
it's
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 a fake
important to
made
yeah, and it's
bond.
important to point out that Rowan's this fake mate connection is before these books, so we never get a chance to find out what that was like for him and
Right.
what it had and what it lacked. But we do know with Hunt and Bryce some of the aspects that are lacking from their mate's connection. They don't have this thread that connects them to each other, this tug, this pull that we've typically seen with mates. Their scents have just somewhat merged together, and everyone's just assumed, oh, you guys must be mates because your scents have merged. A lot of people have said, well, that could also be Caranum. There could also be a Caranum bond that we're actually seeing with those two.
Mhm.
When they talk about it, it's like she can't sense when he's in pain or he's dying, whereas Azriel very clearly states to Cassian, you would know if they died, you would know it in here. So
Well,
he
and Reese knew when Feyre was dead and held her to the mortal realm. Like
Yes,
when
they can often hold it with
in
the thread
ACOTAR,
connecting
yeah,
them.
like we're told that like Reese is her tether to the world and is able to speak to her in this like space of limbo at the end of ACOTAR. So um and Hunt does have a near death experience at the end of HOFAS, and Bryce does not feel that.
Yeah, no,
We
and
also
Bryce often says, "Would you know? Would you know if your mate has died?" And even when they got to that point of accepting each other as mates, it was in such a general conversation. He's like, "Oh, what would we call this connection that we have?" And it's like, "Oh, we could call it mate." And she actually pauses for a bit. Like she's like, it's not really a mate bond, but yeah, all right, we'll call it that. Like,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
everything that they do is very nonchalant. It's like we don't get a massive wedding ceremony. They just kind of trick the Autumn King and then they're like, guess what? We're married. Haha. Like it's,
Yeah.
they hook
Well, that
up.
is kind of also like Feyre and Reese do that a little bit, but
That they do.
just
They
to be
do. They
fair,
do
just to be
kick off
fair.
and get married. That is true.
Um,
That is true. Nestor and Cassian, on the other hand, have their big
yeah,
massive wedding.
they're
But
big, massive thing. I will say what we do hear about, we like Rowan does talk about the experience of being with the person he thought was his mate. And he does, I don't remember the exact lines. It's been a while since I've read it, but he says, like, I did love her, but I also always felt like something was missing. Like we just never, I had been told my whole life what mates were supposed to be, and I kind of knew in my heart that wasn't,
didn't really
that
feel quite
something
like
was
it was all
missing for
there.
us. And I think that might be what we're seeing with Bryce and Hunt. Like it doesn't negate that they love each other. It's
Oh
just
no.
not, it's a different kind of love. Like
And
Rowan can still have that relationship from hundreds of years ago, appreciate it, love that person, and still be wildly in love with Aelin.
exactly, exactly. And we know that this is possibly going to be explored in the next book, that Azriel is probably going to potentially try and explore a relationship with Elaine. Now, Elaine already has a mate, but at this point, it's looking like she's not going to go through with that connection. She's really fighting it. We can't see a connection with her and Lucian, but she wants to be with Azriel. So I think we're definitely going to potentially see that relationship explored. I think though, and I really liked, I spoke to Stephen Walker of all people, who hasn't even read the Crescent Cities, and we asked him, we said, who do you think is right for Azriel? And he said, you know what? He said, I don't think Gwyn or Elaine is right for Azriel. He said, just his personality, the kind of person she goes, I think she should be with a fun party girl. And we're just there as Bryceriel's going, yeah,
Hmm.
party
Fun
girl.
party girl.
I don't know anyone like that might be his mate, that might just be perfect for him, and he could be a club rat and she could be a party girl and they would just live happily ever after like that. Who would that be?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. 100%. Um, yeah, I think they have a lot of chemistry, and SJM has said that Hunt. Oh my God. This is guys, I'm still recovering
Unreal.
from surgery. Okay. I'm still recovering from ankle surgery. So if I'm getting names wrong, that's my excuse today. But SJM has said many times that Azriel is like the dirtier of the Bat Boys and like maybe like a little bit more of like a freak in the bedroom. Like she has said that. It's hard for me to imagine Elaine or Gwen in particular being interested in that. maybe we're wrong, and I trust every author. I think I trust SJM to make me buy whatever romance she picks for Azriel, but it's hard. It just, on the surface, it's hard for me to buy that they would be into like kinky, that would
Oh,
work for like kinky spice scenes.
let's
Whereas
be, yeah.
Bryce, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk about the BDSM aspect of Azriel's future relationship, because we know he's the spiciest. He's going to have very intense needs from the person that he has, and he's also probably going to want a lot of game playing. Now, firstly, let's point to some of the moments that have already happened between Bryce and Azriel that are already in that BDSM realm. Now, firstly, Bryce lands at Azriel's feet. She jumps into the portal, is tugged, pay attention to that word, into Prithian, and lands basically at Azriel's feet. Now, the first thing he does, knife to her throat, he gags her, puts the, over her eyes, and basically blindfolds her and takes her in to
And
see Resand.
throws her over his shoulder.
Yep.
Let's not forget.
Now,
Throws her over his shoulder and just like carries her while she's like kicking and screaming
she
to
doesn't
Reese.
even kick and scream that much. She actually just goes along with it, which is so
Kinda does,
not
but
like,
yeah.
when has Bryce done that? When has Bryce not been like, oh my God, I'm figuring out how to get away? Now, fair enough, she's in shock. There's a language barrier, things like that. But she just goes along with it. As soon as Azriel's in the room, rather than being all alpha hole and let me get away from it, she's like, yep, okay, I'm submitting, and I'm
Yeah.
okay with
Yeah.
this. He puts a blindfold on her and she's just like, yeah, just a little further there. Yeah, that's fine. The other thing is, he gives an exasperated sigh. As he puts her down. He does that, like, oh, I'm in trouble here. Like
Yeah.
that sigh that I feel like we've seen many times with Rowan and Resand, where they're like, oh no, I'm in trouble. So I think that's just important to point out. But
Mhm.
what I see with Azriel is he's really going to want to play games in the bedroom. Like, that's going to
Yeah.
be a really important thing for him. Now, when we think of Gwyn, the Gwyn we know right now is a priestess. She is a priestess. Has been very
She's a
meek and
survivor of
mild.
SA.
Yes,
Like,
and she has been very timid to come out of her shell and grow and develop and move, even just come outside has been a huge thing for her. Now, at the moment, her favorite things are singing at church and getting Nesta to come along. She does enjoy going up, and going up Ramiel and joining the girls and defeating that. That's great. Now, yes, we might see her character eventually develop into this, but it also feels like a long shot to me. I feel like a huge step for her would just be to open up to a romantic relationship again. Right now, she's a priestess and she loves being a priestess. Yes, we could maybe see that kind of relationship, but I also don't really feel like it's a natural gel. The other thing we've seen is Azriel has shut her down when, like, she said, oh, so, Shadow Singer, do you sing? And he just goes, no. And she's like,
no.
oh, okay. Like, whereas Bryce asked him about his favorite music and things like that, and he starts talking to her, and he's like, "Oh, let's play the songs on your phone." He starts humming her favorite song as he walks along the cave system. So it's just the differences that make us go, oh, Azriel's really feeling something here. Now, Elaine, who knows with Elaine? Right now, she does just seem to be interested in gardening. We don't know a lot about Elaine. I do think there's a potential that at least a semi-relationship will be explored in this space. We
I
definitely
think
know
so.
there is a genuine chemistry between these two characters. They do really like each other. I feel my thought is that it's a little bit similar to Kale and Hunt. They're a great sort of chosen mate connection. If Sarah J. Maas decides, I actually just want to go explore this where they just choose their mate, they don't actually marry their real cauldron made mate, then he may go with Elaine. Will that be a real BDSM kind of relationship? Are they going to gameplay? I don't see Elaine being a game player. She's sweet and she's kind, she's honest, she's genuine. They're beautiful things to be. I also think she has potential to be a ruler in her own right, potentially of Spring Court. But we haven't maybe we're still going to see that growth. Maybe it's still going to happen, but I don't really think she's going to be that perfect connection piece for Azriel, in my opinion.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts,
Yeah.
Sally?
No, that's how I feel about it. I think, I think it's I think it's clear that Azriel will have a love interest. Like, Reese got a love interest, then Cassian. I think Azriel will have one as well. I don't think that, like, SJM is gonna just leave Azriel without a love interest. So, that makes you ask the question, well, who is the love interest? And the 2 options in his world just don't make a lot of sense to me. That's not to say that, SGM couldn't convince me of it. Like, I could totally be convinced of it, and I could personally see Elaine having, like, a wild side that she keeps hidden, right? And that Azriel
Yeah.
helps her bring out and helps her leave her timid ways, and maybe she's sort of like the bedroom is her place to be that. But, it just doesn't necessarily vibe for me in the same way that, like, Bryce and Azriel would vibe. So yeah.
We'll just have
I
to wait and see. There's a lot of
yeah.
pining in there right now, a lot of pining and a lot of forbidden love because she's meant to be with Lucian. And we haven't explored anything with Lucian yet anyway. So I think a lot of people are really keen to get some forced proximity between Elaine and Lucian and kind of see what unfolds there. Why
Yeah.
has the Cauldron decided that those two should be mates? Or is there even something going on with Tamlin that we haven't explored yet? But
Right.
I definitely think that Elaine's story is going to be explored and Elaine
Yeah.
is going to grow in this next book, but we're just going to have to wait and see what
Yeah.
actually
And,
unfolds.
like, again, like, the dresser is so important to the
Mhm.
future of those girls. Like, Nesta has flames, Feyre paints the night sky, Elaine gets flowers.
Mhm.
I don't see how Azriel fits into
That
he is connected
story.
to roses, so there is that connection.
True.
So, again, I'm just trying to be fair to, like, all the different
100%.
arguments.
We're trying to consider all the evidence and not be
All the
biased
evidence,
to the best
yeah,
of our
but
ability.
beyond that connection to roses, which I think we have a different interpretation of as being connected to the Sailor Moon theory, I don't really see how a shadow singer who lives in the darkness, who,
Who's going
is
to be living in
gonna be, like,
spring
connected to spring,
eternally?
to some kind of fate that is connected to flowers, like, it just
I'm
I
just
don't know,
the
like
image of her like prancing through spring in the green and everything. Then there's just this shadow in the corner, which is
Yeah,
Azriel just swirling with his, snakes of shadows around him. Just like,
yeah,
this is where I belong in the shadows. This place does not work for me.
yeah, yeah, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. So,
Yeah.
I think that there's something else.
Yeah.
There's
And I
one
think
other thing that Oh,
yeah.
go ahead.
I was going to, maybe if you got more thing about this, because I was going to talk a little bit about
Oh, I was
Azriel
gonna
and his
pivot too.
backstory.
You go right ahead and
Right.
pivot us, because I was gonna pivot us too.
I was just going to talk a little bit about Azrael's backstory and that there is a potential connection that he has a connection to hell, like that we don't know
Oh,
enough
yeah,
yet about his mother. We know that he's not necessarily a fae. He's something different. He's actually something that even Rhysand is a little bit scared of. He's like, we
yeah,
kind of
and
don't
we
really.
know that he's not fully Illyrian. We know that
Yes.
his father was not necessarily an Illyrian, it was his mother. So, that leaves the question of, like, he's, like, half Illyrian is what he
Yes,
is.
yes, yes. And I think we need to explore what that other half is. A lot of the theories going around is that he is actually connected to hell. The belief being that he is somewhat similar to Adis. He is possibly a reincarnation of Adis in the next generation. And we're seeing like history repeating itself, this relationship, this connection with Thea and Adis that happened 1,000 or so years ago, where she jumped into the portal trying to go to hell and she ends up landing at Adis's feet. Now Bryce has gone through the portal and she's landed at Azriel's feet. We think that he may himself be a prince of hell or some kind of connection to hell, but there's still got to be a lot of growth there. But I guess what we can say is that he is connected to darkness. He is darkness incarnate. He is our ultimate dark shadow daddy. We want to explore that. We want to say he's the most beautiful of the three the most beautiful. I need an epic love story for Azriel, not just a side romance love story or a one book love story. We need a whole series based on him, which is why there's the theory that the next book series is going to be, her biggest
Twilight of the
and
Gods.
Twilight of
Yeah.
the Gods, and that Azriel will potentially be the main MMC of that series.
Mhm, mhm.
Mhm.
There's a couple. I'm struggling with, like, what level to get into,
I know.
because
How
it's
deep
like
do I
there's,
go
like,
here?
how do you know what I mean? Like, I could bring up all these tiny little, like, things, but then I'm like, "Oh, this is a podcast." But one of the things that I continue to, like, think about it from HOFAS is the first time that Azriel and Bryce hold hands, it says that light emanates from where they're touching,
Mhm.
and that the shadows looked on in interest.
Yes.
Um, we also see the shadows doing something very interesting with Rune and Hunt, when they are in the prison with the Asteri. Once again, it says that the shadows watched. I think that those shadows are the princes of hell, or so they could either be interpreted as the princes of hell, or they could be interpreted as fate, the cauldron. The
Ooh.
cauldron is also often being, like, talked about as, like, watching or being
Yes.
sentient. And so I think that, again, there's a reason that they glow when they touch. That's not just that's not just like, "Oh, cool, we'll never these 2 characters will never meet again," right? They glow the first time they touch, and they're just never gonna meet again. That doesn't make any sense.
I
Um,
yeah. I saw
but
some
this is like
art the other day, and it was Gwynreal art. Beautiful art, by the way, stunning art. But it had Azriel and Gwyn with their hands touching and light emanating from them holding hands. And all I thought was, there's only been one character that has happened to Azriel with, and it wasn't Gwyn.
it
It
was
was
not
Bryce.
Gwen. Yeah,
When Bryce and Azriel held hands, light emanated from where their hands touched. Now, he also holds Nesta's hand, and it doesn't say anything about that. Doesn't say anything about light
nothing's
emanating.
happening.
The way,
Nope,
while it's not specifically said that it didn't happen, how it reads is that light emanated where Bryce and Azriel were holding hands. I was like, oh, this is strange. And then he's holding Nesta's hand, and it's not doing
and
anything.
nothing's
And I think
happening.
even Nesta looks over and is like, what's going on here? Like,
What's
what's
going
going
on
on
over
here?
there? Why are
There's
you guys
something weird
glowing?
going on here, and I'm
Yeah,
feeling like a third wheel.
yeah. And the shadows watching could be,
Like
like,
curious snakes.
the fate is watching to see, are these 2 fated mates going to get together, because so much of the destiny of the world, not just the world, the destiny of the universe, is dependent on these 2 characters getting together.
That's right. That's
And I
right.
think there's just, like, so many moments where the shadows are watching,
Yes,
and
yes. And the shadows whisper to Azriel, but there's even a few suggestions which was pointed out in Hofas where it even sounds like Bryce can hear the whispering, and she's like, "Can you hear that?" And other people are like, "No, I can't hear it." And so there's even a couple of moments where we actually get an indication that even Bryce might be able to hear them, which would then just be another level of of thinking the connection
Mhm,
these characters potentially have, not just to the sword and the dagger and the tugging and the singing, but then to each other as well. So
mhm.
all right, let's talk about the major Brycerial coded moments, because we've got to go back and talk about the big moments. Now, firstly, we've got Bryce jumps into the portal and she is yanked across worlds, pulled into Prithian. Now, yanked is a typical word that Sarah uses for mate. So that's the first little snippet we have there. We've got the exasperated sigh. Then once they're in the caves, we've got the hand holding. We've got the hand holding through the prison. We've got Bryce getting hit with Azriel's power and it feeling like pure 100% liquor. Like she says, it's even more than Hunt. Now, I don't know about you guys, but whenever I have potential mates or potential end relationships with MMCs and MMCs, I always want them to be with the most powerful. I want them to be with the king or the prince or the most powerful fae. I don't want them to be with the second rate one. I want them to be with the best one. So it was very
Yep.
interesting that in that moment she said his power felt like nothing she'd ever felt before. And it was only after that her power started to have shadows in it. Now, a huge part of Dusk Court is that not only is it light, but it's also shadows, because it's the moment when the sun is going down into darkness and it's the last rays of light. So it's a mixture of light and shadows. And it was only after that moment that the shadows started to happen. Now, Sarah was smart. She did make sure there were a couple of things that were thrown in that could also justify it, being that we could say, well, the power in Midgard is diluted because they've been having their power taken. So maybe that's one of the reasons why. That's the first justification. There's also, she also then obviously absorbs Thea's power while she is in the prison. So maybe that is also part of the reason that she's adopted these shadows. But I also think they are potentially very good covers for what possibly transpired between them. And Sarah, being Sarah, has done a very good job of covering up the tracks so that we don't get that true proof until she wants to actually deliver that.
And let's not forget that after and in that moment, Azriel's power also behaves differently than it ever has. They need to cross a chasm, and she says, "Can't you just have your shadows make us a bridge?" And he's like, "No, that's not how they work." And then she's like, "Well, try." And he does, and it works. And she's like, "Told you," in her classic Bryce
Yeah,
way. And he's like, "No, my powers have never been able to do that."
yeah, yeah.
So, like, his power is also
I
changing
know.
and
After
morphing
500 years, like
after
he's been
500 years.
a bloody long time he's been around for, and his power's changing for the first time in a couple of days of being with Bryce. Like, he also uses his power like a rope. He like uses it at the very end. He uses it like a rope. He's never have we seen his power used in that way, and suddenly he's wielding it in a different way. Now, after
In a different
500 years, you would think that you would have tried every different way to use your power. Why is it suddenly different?
Especially if you're, like the spy master for Reese and doing all, Azrael seems very interested in his power, right? Like he is always kind of talking to the shadows, he's blending in with them, like he would have experimented to try and do that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's doing something different now that Bryce is around.
Yes, yes.
And I think that's really important.
Now, we could say it has something to do with the dagger and the star sword now being reunited, that's why this has happened. But that seems like again, a very good cover that Sarah has in the past always used other connections to hide the mates bond, the Canon bond, the
Bargain.
agreement bargain bond. Again, we're like, oh, it could be the dagger and the star sword being together. But I think that they are just an analogy for the bigger connection that is actually needed. And who
Mhm.
is actually meant to wield those particular weapons is more of the connection. I did ask an interesting question to my subject matter experts about the star sword and the dagger, because obviously we know that as they're going through the caves, they're singing to each other, they're tugging, and they're particularly like drawn to Bryce. And I couldn't quite recall, did that continue to happen once she left Prithian? Once she went off with them and went into Midgard, did that actually happen? And my understanding is that pretty much they did not act in quite the same way when she was outside of
Mm.
Prithian. They really didn't have quite that same singing overwhelmingness that it had there. What are your thoughts on that, Ali?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right about that. I think they were definitely not behaving in the same way. It was almost like they couldn't get them too close in the caves or it would be like overwhelming. Whereas when she takes them back to Midgard, it's not the same level of like keep them apart separate from each other. There's no moment where it is like overwhelming her, the tug. And there are many moments in the cave where she talks about how that tug is overwhelming her, and it's like, oh, maybe the tug that you're feeling is not the weapons, it's Azrael himself. We also can't forget that the weapons, the knife and the sword, are cauldron made, which is, we learn, connected to the power of the Asteri. And these objects that are cauldron made, Asteri power made, often behave in strange ways around people with star
Mate,
power,
star
the
power,
star
mate.
power
Yes.
and mates. So I think that like there's going to be more to the fact that those weapons exist and are connected to Bryce and Azriel,
Mm.
um,
Yeah.
that we don't really understand yet.
Absolutely. There's also a lot of concern about the Dread Trove and the fact that Bryce has this horn attached to her back. Now, one of the things that happens at the start of HOFAS is Azrael almost seems ready to cut this thing out of her back. And we could interpret that as, oh, he just like doesn't like her and he wants to cut it out. But there's almost a sense of concern that this is an evil thing and it's attached to her. And if he was a mate and he sensed that there was something evil attached to his mate's back, what would he probably want to do? He'd probably want to get the thing off her ASAP to the point that he's ready to
Mhm.
carve it out with his knife and remove it from her body. Now, there are a few theories and suggestions, particularly with Bryce acting a little strange in the second half of HOFAS. A lot of people saying they don't like her, and a lot of people thinking that the horn may actually be impacting Bryce and leading her down a darker path, that it's quite a bad thing that this is connected to her, and we may have concerns for her as to what's going to happen, because it's probably not a good thing to have a piece of the Dread Trove attached to you permanently.
Yeah. I think we know that like it's not a great feeling, you know? I mean, Nesta and Elaine barely survived going into the cauldron, which is a similarly linked power. And you know, the mask, which is also in the dread trove, also seems to have this sentience that every time Nesta puts it on, she says it is harder and harder to take off. Imagine if that same power is in your back, what it
Mm,
would do to you and how it would slowly start to drive you crazy. I personally, I know a lot of the Brycerials have different opinions on this, but I personally think Bryce knows that Azriel is her mate in the second half of HOFAS, and that is why she's behaving so differently. But
yeah, I do
the Dread
too.
Trove, I also think that like the horn being connected to her certainly is not making her feel great.
Bryce being typical Bryce doesn't tell us anything.
No.
There's a moment when she turns towards Hunt and her light dims and she says, I know. Like she's talking to her own light. The way that Azrael talks to his shadows, she's talking to her starlight and she says, I know. And it's like, what do you know, Bryce? What do you know? Why is your light dimming and you're saying, I know? Because it almost seems like she's going,
Yeah.
I know he's not the right choice, but I'm choosing him anyway. That's what it
Yeah.
felt like to me reading that line. So I think that is very, very interesting. I think it's really interesting that you spoke about the mask, because I think that's another really interesting aspect of HOFAS, because as you said, Nesta is finding it harder and harder to control the mask. Now, when Bryce uses the mask, it basically says hello to her. She has full
Yeah.
control of this thing. Whatever it is about her power, whether it's the horn on her back, whether it's the starlight power, this thing basically sings to her. It is meant to be wielded by her. Now, what's interesting is a lot of people are very freaked out about the Hunt and Bryce spice scene in HOFAS. It's really icky. I don't know what it is about it. Everyone I've spoken to has said it was quite an icky scene. And it's almost like in that moment, he siphons her power in that moment. Now, after that, he wields that mask like it's nothing. Like everyone's saying, do not use that mask. Like it is so dangerous for the average Fae to use that mask. Yet he goes and uses it after he's siphoned her power
Yeah.
and takes it on, takes it off, no problems, no repercussions, nothing. Unless
That we
there's a
know of.
repercussion we don't know about. Yeah, I was about to say,
Yeah.
unless there's one that we don't know about that's still coming. But we don't really get any indication that, which is again concerning. Is can he siphon her power? Has Hell made him so he can siphon the starborn power? That's kind of concerning. It's not a nice thing. I don't really like the idea of being with a mate that's just taking, not sharing power, but taking power. So he
Can
certainly
take
doesn't
it.
give her, that much power. Not that she really, I
Yeah.
mean, who wants lightning? I want shadows, not lightning. Sorry.
I mean, and he can, like, charge her up, like, we've seen him
Yeah,
charge her up,
true.
so he
Yeah.
can give her power, but it's almost like he's her battery, and so why would he then be, like, taking power from her? It it just feels weird. And it just something, I probably need to go the thing is, like, I should go back and reread that spice scene, but it
I
gave me
don't want
such
to.
the ick that I don't want to. Yeah, like, I'm sure if I read it again, I would probably, like, if with a really critical eye, I might be able to point out, like, these are the things that are making me feel really icky about this, but I just don't wanna do it. It made me
Yep.
feel really gross. I just didn't and I don't think it was just that he pulled her power. I think there was more to it.
Yeah. The
It
language used, it certainly wasn't this intimate romantic mates connection scene that we go, wow,
no.
that was really, and the interesting thing is that even people that aren't into this particular ship, they didn't really like it either. I know many people that came
Right.
out saying, don't like Hunt, don't like Bryce, didn't even really like Hofas, not a good book. That's generally, and I think a lot of us haven't realized that there's maybe reasons for that, that there's maybe a very intentional reason Sarah has built this book this way, and it's going to make sense with the future books to come. But right now, we're sitting in this uncomfortable space. I compare it to Tower of Dawn. Can you imagine what it would have been like for readers who had read and got to Tower of Dawn, had just finished the previous book, Empire of
Yeah.
Storms, and been left with that epic cliffhanger, and then we're like, oh my God, we're finally getting the next book. I'm
Finally getting
finally going
another
to
book.
get answers.
Yeah.
And we get a whole book about Kale. No Aelin whatsoever. Like, that would
Yeah.
have killed me, absolutely killed me. But you can
Yeah.
never be too sure. If Sarah does that in the next book, I will die. I will honestly give up and be like, I could not do another Tower of Dawn. I hope she learnt. Don't do that to us. We need some connection, please.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I don't I could easily see a more book happening. I could easily see because Moore's been gone, she's been on the continent. She clearly has a lot of character development. I could easily see him, but I also like Moore so much more than I like Kale. So I would be open to a more
That
book,
would be a
whereas, like,
great novella to do in between the big books. Like,
see,
not,
I would be down for a whole more book.
yeah,
Um,
especially if
but,
we
like,
get it in a closer timeline than 2-3 years, like we're currently
yeah,
looking at.
I don't know. I feel like we're probably not gonna get it like, it's gonna be a
Anytime
long time.
soon.
We're gonna be 80 years old still talking about
Oh, I know,
Bryceriel.
I know. I'm not young, Sarah. You need to pump them out. I want to see this through in my
Yeah,
lifetime. So let's maybe talk about, as some of our wrap up, I guess our favorite, you and I, we've got a
yeah,
favorite Bryce Azriel connection, and that is the bonus chapter that we get in
yeah,
HOFAS.
yeah,
We've got to finish on that because that's just our
yeah. We've
favorite.
talked about it many times, but we can't we
Oh,
just
we can never get
we
enough.
gotta keep talking about it because we love it. We just love that chapter.
What are some of your favorite moments from that chapter that give you that feeling that it really points to a potential mates connection between
Yeah.
Bryce and Azriel?
One, he's watching her sleep.
Yep.
Like,
Tick.
that to me is such a mini micro trope of mates, like, you're together, he can't sleep, so he's just watching his mate sleep, doesn't need any
Oh,
entertainment, like, just watches
like,
her, like
and like,
and then
as
she, like, wakes up and isn't mad about it. If she woke up and Hunt was watching her sleep, she would be like, "What the heck is wrong with you?" But with him, she's
oh,
just like, "Oh, you can't sleep? Do you wanna hear some music?" Like,
and she knocks her head, like, she does a whole meet cute, knocks her head on the cave,
yeah,
like, she's like, oh my God, he's staring at me, and she jumps and she bangs
yeah,
herself on the head again, a very like romantic introduction kind of thing. But the way, I mean, and I just think about Azriel as a character, and he has been looking for love for over 500 years and has been living eternally in being without love. He's been
yeah,
alone and he's been suffering, and all his best friends now have their mates, and he's the last one standing. I can honestly see this scene play out where he has gone out onto the grass, looked at the sky, and said, why have you not given me my mate? Where
yeah,
is my mate? And then
yeah.
boom, Bryce lands at his feet. Like, that is
Yeah.
so something that Sarah would do, but in a way that we
Yeah.
can't see it like that. And I just
Yeah.
love the idea of that she just lands in front of him and he goes,
Yeah.
oh, thank you. Like, awesome.
Yeah.
But then it's
Yeah.
complicated because she's already got a mate back in her homeland. And as usual, fates aren't just going to make it easy for you. They're going to make it complicated.
Yeah.
But now we're at this bonus scene and we're getting this intimacy between these characters that we're seeing. He can't help but just look at her, and not just looking at her like she is potentially going to run away at any moment, therefore I can't take my eyes off her. Like, he is just watching her breathe, watching her
Yeah.
sleep. Like,
Yeah.
there's something
Yeah.
like she's sleeping. She's not going to run away when she's sleeping. He doesn't need to watch her in that moment, but he's intensely watching her to the point that Nesta's like, that's weird. Why are you doing that, Azriel?
Why are you watching her? Yeah. Yeah. But like, that is such a, like, if that were in any other book, I would be like, mates, they're mates, they're mates, you know?
Exactly. If we didn't have Hunt going on in the background and Elaine over here and different intergalactic worlds, we would be like mates, just straight up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he likes her club music. I love it. I just can't get over it. He loves her club rap music.
Yeah. And think about some of the opening scenes of House of Earth and Blood that we get Bryce in a club. Like, that is her scene. That is her. She vibes to the music. She wants her friends around her. She wants the music. This makes her feel alive, and this is what she lives for. To find out, and Hunt doesn't like music. Just little FYI. He doesn't like music. He likes podcasts. He's like, why would you listen to that? He actually makes fun of her music. So,
and by the way, I feel like, I can't remember, I think we've talked about this before. SJM once said in an interview, if there is any character who doesn't like music, they're evil. She said those like exact words. If there's a character who doesn't like music in the future, in my books, they're probably evil.
Yeah. So watch out for that. Watch out for that. Concerns for Hunt right there. But he loves her music. Like, he actually has a particular thing. And then she also notes, she goes, oh, he'd probably get along great with Rune and his friends as well. We instantly see this potential for like this connection to her brother, who she loves dearly, and that Azriel would just fit in with them. We also can kind of get a sense that Azriel is almost a fish out of water where he's currently. He loves Rhysand, he loves Cassian, but I feel like we're also starting to see a little bit of a disconnect for him, that he doesn't quite feel like he belongs. And I could see Azriel really relishing living in a more modern world. I feel like, and we see that when he listens to the music. He's sort of fascinated, even if it's scarily so, about the weapons and things like that as well that they have. He's very fascinated about this futuristic world, and I see him potentially being an explorer that would want to go and find out more about these kinds of places.
And potentially he has the power to go. We don't exactly understand the full extent of his powers. Like, he could, because he can just sort of like step through the shadows.
Yeah.
So
there's some,
could he potentially walk to a different world?
World Walker would be the theory. Now, look, there are some deep Bryceriel theories. I'm going to say deep because it's a little bit more of a, like, it's not, there's definitely no evidence to this, but this is just a theory that's out there. One of the theories is that we've already seen Azriel in HOFAS. So we may be seeing future Azriel who has traveled back in time, maybe to protect Bryce, maybe to set things up in a certain way. But we actually get the indication that he's actually been jumping worlds and he's been there. There's a few times that Azriel talks about some hot rock star guy over in the corner, and she pays attention to how good looking. There's a particular Viper Queen soldier in House of Earth and Blood that protects her from the, what is the actual Crystallos, however you call that monster. He protects it. He has a really different kind of armor on. It's not the typical armor that the other one has on, but he's got a mask on, so we can't really see. But a lot of people are theorizing that Azriel may have already jumped into Crescent City World and we don't know it's him, but he's been popping up here and there, and we might find out in the future. So, look, it's a theory. Go read those parts, see what you think. It's fun. It's a little breadcrumbs, whatever you want to take from it, but it's certainly something that a few people are theorizing. It'll be interesting to see if it turns into anything or if it's just a random theory that amounts to nothing.
That's the fun of the theories, though, you know? It's so fun to find these small little Easter eggs and wonder, like, "Ooh, is that a clue?" You
I
know?
know, and
It's
if that
so
ends
great.
up being, like, the future book that, like, we've got Azriel world walking, possibly because he has to do it to rescue Bryce or find her in the future or something
Yes,
like that. That
yes.
is such an epic story that I wanna read because
Yeah.
that
Imagine him being maybe he's in the shadows when, they talk about being mates and his heart is breaking, like, I just there's so much potential there
heartache,
to just, like, rip
so much
our hearts out,
heartache.
and I can't wait.
I like the idea that Azrael has to go there and watch it all play out with Hunt,
Yeah.
knowing that he can't intervene because he can't
Yes.
intervene in the past, but he has to just watch all this unfold, like his mate hooking up with a
Yeah.
could even be a villain and
In
going,
the
I have to
future.
just
Yeah.
freaking watch this. Mind you, with his BDSM side, he might enjoy a bit of watching. I feel like that might be something he
Maybe
can get
so.
behind. I feel like he'd take that back to the bedroom. So it's all very interesting. It's all very fun. But going back to the bonus scene, another big so obviously they go through the songs and that's amazing. And I think we
Yeah.
see some
We've talked
future
about that a lot. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I also love the final page of this chapter that talks about it really gives an analogy of what I potentially see happening in the future, that suddenly it all goes dark, the power goes out in the phone, and then Bryce is left in darkness and she's alone. But then she hears this voice, Azriel's voice, in the future, singing her song, singing her favorite song that she has a connection to, and knowing it's all going to be okay, leading her into the light. So we get this idea that things are going to get really, really dark for Bryce, but Azriel's going to help her back. And
Yeah.
that, to me, that was the page that I was done. I was done for.
Yeah.
That was like, if this doesn't
Yeah.
happen, I don't know how I'm going to
Well,
survive on the planet because my whole life
and
is invested in this now.
yeah, and the potential, like, symbolism between it being the power of the phone that's going out,
Mhm.
and we end with Midgard not even knowing how they're going to power their world because so much of it depends on Feylight, and they don't have that, or First Light, and they don't have that anymore.
Yeah.
I think that there's a little sneaky little parallel there as well, that, like, Midgard's gonna lose their power, it's gonna go dark in Midgard, and who's gonna come in to help Bryce save it? It might be
Yes, yes,
Azrael. Yeah.
yes, that's right. It's very exciting. There's a final little bit which is worth talking about. I'm trying to think, because there's Ember. We get that other little, I think it's a bonus scene where Ember and Randall are hanging out
Yeah.
in Akatar with Rhysand and that. We find out it's so beautiful. First of all, it's so beautiful. I love how she's thrown these characters together. We get Ember actually being like this motherly,
Mother figure. Yeah.
protective person for Nesta, which Nesta has needed her whole life. She's never had a mother that's actually loved her. And seeing Ember actually being able to be in there and be that pivotal role for her is so special and important. We also see Randall hanging out with the Bat Boys. Now, something really interesting is Randall's last name, which I don't know off the top of my head, but I know this has been confirmed, actually means bat in another in it actually means bat is what it
Oh
actually
my
means in
gosh.
another language. Yeah, yeah. So definitely a little connection there to Randall and the Bat Boys. And so I think we can still see that there's hopefully going to still be connection between these characters. I hope this is not the end of the crossover because I really feel like we're just seeing the beginning of what could potentially be. And I feel like not only Bryce and Azriel, but we see so much of these other characters needing each other and the benefit that they could have, even for Rhysand. Rhysand doesn't have a fatherly figure. Rhysand doesn't have anyone to pull him into line sometimes. So an older, mature figure to say, you're out of line. You need to be
Yeah.
good to your mate or be good to your friend or something like that. He needs that
Yeah. True.
fatherly, wise figure. And I think Randall could really be that. And I love how Amber stands her ground. And even though she's human and mortal, they actually love that. They love that in Prithian
Yeah.
and respect her. And I just, it's so beautiful. Another really interesting thing that a few people talked about is after the cave scenes, Azriel and Bryce never cross paths again. Like
Yeah.
they're never in the same room. And that's some have said that's quite concerning. We even see Cassian and Nesta almost get quite jarred when they see Hunt they kind of almost get a shocked look of surprise.
Yeah.
It comes
And
across
Ness is
as
like,
a
"This is your
resentment.
mate?" Like, "This is your
Yeah.
mate?" Almost like, "Oh, okay. Haha,
Yeah,
this is your mate."
yeah. So I think that's interesting. And I think it's the first time she goes back. There are shadows. There's like coming over the mountain, and then she quickly darts out. Now, a few people said it's Rhysand, but it's not Rhysand, because Rhysand can he can just jump in. He can just portal shift, whatever he does. He can just jump.
Yep.
But Azriel, not so much. He can't do that. He has to fly his way over, because we don't know exactly how the world walking or whatever works, but he normally has to actually fly himself there. So the fact that there is this imminent shadow coming over the mountain, we get the feeling that could be Azriel. Of course, at that time, potentially being angry. She's taken his dagger. He's pissed about that.
Yep.
But that's another thing that
He
people have
could
wondered
also
about.
be saying, "Don't," he could be coming like, "Don't leave, don't leave,"
You know, he could be like, "You're back. My mate's back. We
Yes,
felt her connection," and he's running. And Bryce, being typical Bryce, she's run off before she's had a chance to deal with her emotions, leaving us in pain. But I'm sure it's all going to come. So
full circle.
I know,
Yeah.
I know. So anyway, have you got any final thoughts about our discussion today? Any final Brycerial moments, or what you think we're potentially going to get next book?
No, I think we've covered it all. I mean, it's like I said at the beginning, there's so much more. Like, we have really only just scratched the surface, because it's really hard to get into like textual analysis in a podcast. So really, go, if you're interested in this theory, go check out some of the Reddit pages, the TikTok pages. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get answers to this even in the next book. I think it's going to be some time. Potentially, it could be 2 more books from now. So potentially one more Akatar, one more Crescent City, and then a book where we start to get this love story started. So I think we're years away, unfortunately. But that just means we get to keep talking about it.
I hope that Sarah puts our minds to bed about Azriel's mate in the next book, because I feel like, from a sanity perspective of the whole of Bookstagram, we need that book. It doesn't mean they have to be together or anything, but we just need this is Azriel's mate. Even if it's not going to work out, we can still be like, oh, we don't know who he's going to be with, because he might not choose his mate. But it would be good to have that confirmed, so that it just puts all this concern to bed. Because I think if we have to wait too many more books, it's just overwhelming for people, not just for us, but also for the Gwynreels and the Elreels. I think we all just want to know which pathway this is kind of going on, so we can kind of just be on that path and go, okay,
Yeah.
this is the path. We're on this path, like, unlikely to shift. And right now we're really in a place where we just don't know. So hopefully we'll get a bit more clarity about the direction that the future. I think we'll definitely know the direction in the next book, especially because she said it's extremely long. I think a lot is going to happen and transpire. So it's not just like a quick book of, we're just wrapping up Akatar, we're just getting a few we'll just get Azriel's love story sorted out, Elaine's love story sorted out, and then we're all done. No. We're just, I think we're going to get Elaine's love story, and then we're going to get, and there's this massive story that's just taking off, and it's going to be well beyond Prithian. So it's going to be very, very interesting. Very exciting.
Super exciting.
Right. Well, thank you for listening to us. Please subscribe. We would love to hear your thoughts. Please tell us what you thought of today's episode. If you guys want more Bryceriel, thank you so much for listening in. I hope this was helpful. Hopefully it gave you some interesting new ideas about the Bryce and Azriel theory and what this is all about. Please share in the comments. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye.